Hey guys, Tommy Diaz here again, doing the weekly nugget. This is the second week. For those of you that tuned in last week, video was a little bit longer than I initially intended. I wasn't as organized as I wanted to be. In my mind I was organized, but thoughts go back and forth. But anyways, so this week I have an outline on the things that came to me throughout the week, and kind of what I wanted to talk about this week. For those of you that didn't tune in last week, please do so. If you have questions or thoughts, go ahead and throw up some comments. And you know, that's definitely something that we could always discuss. And this is supposed to be like a food for thought type thing. Biblical truths and just general food for thought, things to stimulate our minds, things that will make us look at our perspectives and kind of, you know, reevaluate where we stand on things. Today I want to talk about, generically, I guess we call it American privilege. Regardless of race, regardless of color, I mean, if we live in America, we're blessed in so many ways, and the original thought is, how does that impact us? How does that impact the way we think? How does that impact our attitudes? How does that impact how we look at others? And we as Americans, we have a number of privileges. Obviously, for the purposes of this video, I'm not going to cover. I'm not going to make an exhaustive list, but just throwing some out there. Free speech. So the privilege of speech. Just last week in Bangladesh, 2 journalists were hacked to death because they worked for a LGBT publication. You don't have that problem in the United States. In the United States, you can work for a racist publication. You can work for a anti-government publication. I mean, we've got WikiLeaks. We've got a number of alternative media, and you have the freedom to read those publications. You have the freedom to work for those publications. You have the freedom to go on Facebook and put a post saying, I don't like Tommy's video on the Weekly Nugget, because we have that freedom. Why? Because we live in America. In North Korea, I found this article that was talking about the North Korean government killed this North Korean worker. They put him to death simply because he picked up the phone. He called someone in South Korea to discuss the price of rice in North Korea. So the government didn't like that, so they put him to death. And in a lot of other instances, not only do they put you to death, but they'll put your family to death too. And there's tons of others. I'm sure you could spend all day on the internet looking for, you know, places where you don't have the freedom of speech. Here in the United States, we can travel. We can go from Texas to Louisiana to New York to LA. We can go anywhere we want to go. You can't do that in other countries. In Syria, there's a civil war going on right now. You can't travel in that country without putting yourself in danger. And there's tons of countries in North Africa and the middle of Africa where there are militant groups that they don't allow that kind of movement. If you decide you're going to go from point A to point B in one of those locations, you run the risk of getting stopped, or you run the risk of some sort of checkpoint. We have we have the privilege of information, right? The United States, right? There's open records. Assuming something is not classified as, is not classified or top secret, you're able to attain information. The government doesn't block websites like they do in other countries. For example, North Korea. I think there's like 8 websites that are allowed by the government in North Korea. Any other website is filtered out. So we have that here in the United States. A big one, especially for me, being a Christian, the privilege of religion, the ability to have the freedom to worship Jesus, to worship my God, without placing my life or the life of my family in danger. March of last year, for example, in China, a Christian pastor was sentenced to 14 years in prison. Why? Because he was meeting as a church. He had a church. The government didn't like that, so 14 years of his life he's going to spend behind bars in that country. Last week I told you guys that I am a partner at the Austin Stone. Not 2 or 3 years ago, one of our pastors was in Benghazi, a year after the whole Benghazi incident for the Arab Spring happened. He was there with his wife, his kid. He was teaching chemistry, and he was there as a missionary, but he worked as a chemistry teacher. He was out jogging. He was shot dead. Ronnie Smith, he was 33 years old. So we take that for granted, that we have that freedom. And then we have the financial privilege. The privilege of living in an extremely wealthy country. Here's some perspective for everyone out there. The U.S. Census Bureau, they put out numbers for poverty thresholds on a year-to-year basis. The poverty level in the United States, meaning that if you make less than this amount per year, you're considered to be in poverty in the United States, which is the richest country on earth. For a single person living, one individual living by themselves, the poverty level is $12,082. If you make $12,082 or less in the United States, and you have no dependents and you live alone, you are considered to be in poverty. For 2 people, so like a married couple with no kids, that number goes up to $15,391. So if you make less than $15,391 in the United States, you and your spouse together, you're considered to be in poverty. Now, how does poverty in the United States compare to poverty in the rest of the world? Well, the global poverty threshold is $1.90 per day. That is roughly $693 to $695 a year. So in the United States, one person is considered poor if they make less than $12,000. In the world, you're considered poor if you make less than $693 a year. $693 a year. Now, back to the United States. The average income in the United States is $51,939. That's the average Joe who works, 40 hours a week. That's the average that they make, $51,939. Now, if you go to globalrichlist.com, which ranks wealth, it ranks you based on what you make on an annual basis, and it compares it to the rest of the world. If you make the average income in the United States, which is $51,939, that means that you're in the top 0.28% of the wealth in planet Earth. That means that you're At $51,939, that means you make more money than 7,432,663,275 people. There are only 16,800,000 people that make more money than you do in the world. And we get all that for free. I don't want to say for free. We get that as a privilege of living in this country because this is a great country. So these are all privileges that we get. So what happens though is that we get spoiled by these privileges, and they produce inside of us this attitude and this like spirit of ungratefulness, this spirit of entitlement, where we're so used to living in a country where we have all these freedoms and we have all these benefits because of being a citizen of the United States that we forget, and we feel like we are owed. We begin to feel, myself included, I battle with this sometimes, where I feel like, oh, I deserve this or I deserve that. Even at, even at the amount of money that I make, which I'm close to, I'm right around average, and I still feel like I don't make enough. I still feel like, man, if I made more money, I'd be able to do this, I'd be able to do that, I'd be able to, maybe go on a vacation. I wouldn't live check to check, or, or I would be able to maybe put more money into savings, or, the fact that we're even able to have a savings account, that in and of itself is kind of proof is in the pudding that we make enough money to have a savings account when there's people that don't make enough money to eat. But it produces in us this ungratefulness. So then the question becomes, well, how do we show our ungratefulness, and how does God feel about our being grateful versus our being ungrateful? So I got some scriptures that I'm gonna blow through that are gonna show examples of complaining. They're gonna show examples of grumbling. They're gonna show examples of a total lack of gratefulness, and an absolute obliviousness to the blessings that they had. So we'll start in Exodus 14, verse 11. Then the people, they said to Moses, is it because there are no graves in Egypt that you've taken us away to die in the wilderness? What have you done bringing us out of Egypt? Now the Egyptians, in this scripture, the Egyptians had kind of changed their mind. We shouldn't have let the Israelites go. We don't have no slaves no more. And so the Pharaoh and his army pursue them. And then these guys are trapped between the water and the Pharaoh's army. And they turn to Moses and they blame Moses. And they're like, hey, why'd you bring us all the way out here to die? And of course, we know the story. Everybody knows that, God splits the Red Sea. He saves his people. So God comes through, saves the people. But the people had no faith, and they turned to Moses. And I'm going to make a point about that, because they keep turning to Moses in a lot of these, and that kind of made me realize something. Exodus 15, verse 24. Here we go again. And the people grumbled against Moses, saying, what shall we drink? So the people had come to this well. They were in the wilderness. They came to this like local water supply, but the water was bitter. So they turned against Moses, started complaining. What are we going to drink? And so Moses cried to the Lord. The Lord showed him a log. He threw that log into the water. The water became sweet. They're able to drink the water. Exodus 16, verse 2. And the whole congregation, again, of the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. And the people of Israel said to them, would that we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by meat pots and ate bread to the full. For you have brought us out of the wilderness, for you brought us into the wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger. So these people, they actually are at a point where they're looking back at their slavery in Egypt as a good thing. They're like, oh man, we used to sit around and we used to eat like pots of meat, and we used to eat bread until we were full, totally forgetting the abuse that they suffered at the hands of the Egyptians, totally forgetting the oppression of their taskmasters. They actually thought it was okay to go back to slavery, and they looked at it as a good thing. Exodus 17 verse 2, therefore the people quarreled with Moses and said, give us water to drink. So they've moved on to another part of the wilderness. They're thirsty again. And Moses said to them, why do you quarrel with me? Why do you test the Lord? But the people thirsted for water, and the people grumbled against Moses. And so, in all these scriptures, you see these people, and who is it that they turn against? You know, they turn against the man of God. They turn against God's representative. And they're really turning against God, but Moses is like right there, and so he's kind of the one who bears the brunt of their complaint. And that's what they do. They just complain and they complain and they complain. So how does God reply to them, right? He always comes through. He always comes through. He has some responses here that I'm going to go through, but even in those responses, he always comes through. When they're thirsty, he gives them water. When they're hungry, he gives them food. When they're in danger, he protects them. So he was a pillar of fire at night to keep the Egyptians away. While the Red Sea gets split, they cross on dry land. Once they've crossed, the fire pillar disappears. The Pharaoh's army starts to follow, and then the water closes, destroys the army. But so I want to make the point that God always comes through. He never says, too bad, go thirsty, or too bad, go hungry. Now, he does have a response for their complaining. In Numbers 11, verse 1, here we have people complaining again. It says, and the people complained in the hearing of the Lord about their misfortunes. Oh, because it's so misfortunate that they were set free from slavery, and that they were going to get a promised land, and that God had done all these great things for them. That was so misfortunate. But they complained about their misfortunes. That's how they saw it, as they were misfortuned. And when the Lord heard it, his anger was kindled, and the fire of the Lord burned among them and consumed some outlying parts of the camp. So God, he got fed up. He was slow to anger, but he does eventually get angry, and his fire burned, and some of the outlying parts of the camp were consumed with his fire. We skipped down a couple verses. Numbers 11, now we're in verse 4. Now the rabble that was among them had a strong craving, and the people of Israel also wept again, and they said, oh, that we had meat to eat. We remember the fish that we ate in Egypt that cost nothing, the cucumbers, the melons, the leeks, the onions, and the garlic. But now our strength is dried up, and there is nothing at all but this manna to look at. So God had done this miracle. God had basically made it so that bread rained down from heaven, and all they had to do was go outside and pick it up. And they were tired of that. They were tired of the manna, and so they were complaining. And I guess, I don't know, Egypt must have had some pretty good buffets, because here they're talking about, oh man, I remember the cucumbers, the melons, the leeks, the onions. So they're looking back at that time like, oh man, we used to eat like kings. I mean, they're talking about their time in Egypt like it was a spa, and they were just at the retreat, and they were eating this buffet of lusciousness. Not at all true, but that was their perspective. Now, here's God's, again, he comes through, but here's God's response. Numbers 11:18. So God tells Moses, say to the people, consecrate yourselves, for tomorrow you shall eat meat. For you have wept in the hearing of the Lord, saying, who will give us meat to eat? For it was better for us in Egypt. Therefore the Lord will give you meat, and you shall eat. You shall not just 1 day, or 2 days, or 5 days, or 10 days, or 20 days, but a whole month, until it comes out at your nostrils and becomes loathsome to you, because you have rejected the Lord. So God's going to give them meat. He always comes through. But he's angry at them. He's like, all right, fine, I'm going to give you meat, but I'm going to give you so much meat it's going to come out your nose. And I wonder if sometimes we complain so much that we make God feel that way about us. Asking for, confusing the things that we want with the things that we need. Asking for things and then getting mad when we don't receive them. I wonder how many times we have this attitude of complaining and complaining and complaining and asking and I wonder how that makes our God feel. Because biblically, this is how Israel made him feel. So the big lesson in all this is that we who live here in America are super blessed. How about we forget about the things we don't have, or the things that we think we want, and we start to think and maybe make a list of the things that we do have, the ways that we're blessed, the ways that we are blessed. That's really the best word to use. In the Bible, the phrase give thanks, it appears roughly 70 times. We're supposed to be thankful at all times. We're not just supposed to be thankful where times are great. Sometimes it's easy to be thankful when times are great, and it's difficult to be thankful when we're going through rough times. But in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 7, Paul, who was a great guy, I mean, Paul wrote most of the New Testament, and he was responsible for spreading the gospel to most of the known world at that time. Paul was given a thorn in his flesh to keep him from being conceited, because Paul was taken up to heaven, and he was able to see things that we haven't seen, and so to keep him from getting prideful and conceited about it, God gave him a thorn in his side. Now, the Bible doesn't say what that thorn is. Some people think that the thorn on his side was that he was losing his eyesight, that he was going blind. And we know that he traveled around with people, and we know that although he wrote most of the New Testament, he actually dictated most of the New Testament to others who wrote it. But anyways, he asked God to remove the thorn in his flesh, and God said no. God basically told him, he said, no, I'm not going to take that away, because my grace is sufficient for you. So God said, hey, you have this thorn that in your flesh, I'm not going to take it away. Be grateful for the grace that I gave you. Be grateful for the fact that I sent my son to die on the cross, to shed his blood, to be broken, for your sins to be forgiven, and for me to be able to pour my grace on you, right? So I think if we think hard enough, There is always something to be grateful for. Even in the hard times, there is always something to be grateful for. If you're broke and you have no money, are you healthy? I don't always, have extra cash, but God has blessed me with a beautiful daughter. He has blessed me with health. He has blessed me with family. He's blessed me with food at the table, a home, a roof over my head. He's blessed me with a vehicle. There's tons of people that don't have vehicles, or have vehicles that are always breaking down. So if we think hard enough, there is always going to be something to be thankful for. And the thing that's really convicting is when you go to some of these like third world countries where people are in true poverty, to see that those people a lot of times are more grateful than we are, and they're less blessed than we are. Those people a lot of times, they live a simpler life because they don't have all the entertaining and all the benefits and the theaters and the electronic devices, and their life is simpler than our lives, and in some ways they're happier because of that. So today, the food for thought, the nugget for today, or for this week, is if you find yourself complaining, consider stopping. Consider instead coming up with a list of things that you can be thankful for, and then thank God for those things, because every good thing comes from above. And if you can't find anything to be thankful for, and you consider yourself a Christian, then thank God for adopting you into His family. Thank Jesus for dying on the cross, for giving up everything to purchase us and ransom us, redeem us. Because in Christ there is always something to be thankful for. Let's see if there's any questions or comments. Let's see. No questions or comments today. Again, my name is Tommy, and this was the Weekly Nugget, week 2, and we'll see you guys. Next week. Thanks.